The hammer struck the anvil with a rhythm that had once brought Vance Ryerson comfort. But now each clang felt hollow against the emptiness that had settled into his chest since the war ended. He looked up from the cherry-red steel cooling on his workbench when the shadow fell across his doorway, and his breath caught not from fear, though perhaps it should have, but from the sheer unexpectedness of seeing an orc woman standing at the threshold of his smithy with armor hanging loose from one shoulder, and exhaustion carved into every line of her face. She swayed slightly, one hand gripping the doorframe hard enough that her knuckles went pale green beneath the darker emerald of her skin. Blood seeped through a poorly tied bandage on her left arm, and the leather straps that should have held her breastplate secure dangled uselessly at her side. Her tusks, small and elegant as such things could be, caught the afternoon light filtering through the smoke-stained windows, and her amber eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made him forget, just for a moment, that he was supposed to be afraid of her kind. "Can you fix it?" Her voice was rougher than he expected, worn down by pain or perhaps just exhaustion. She gestured at the armor with her good hand. "The straps broke during a fight. I cannot go home like this." Vance set down his tools slowly, aware that any sudden movement might spook her or give her reason to think he meant her harm. The war had ended 6 months ago, but peace was a fragile thing in the borderlands, and an orc walking into a human village was either desperate or foolish. Looking at the way she held herself, the protective curl of her shoulders and the way her eyes darted to the street behind her, he suspected it was the former. "I can fix it," he said, keeping his voice level and calm. "Come inside before someone sees you." She hesitated, and he could see the calculation in her gaze, weighing whether trusting a human blacksmith was more dangerous than staying visible in the street. Finally, she stepped over the threshold, moving with the careful precision of someone who knew exactly how much pain her body could tolerate before it gave out entirely. Vance moved to close the shutters, dimming the light in the smithy but also hiding them from curious eyes. The village of Thornmere had seen enough violence during the war years that the sight of an orc would likely trigger panic or worse. He had no desire to see this woman torn apart by a mob just because she needed her armor repaired. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the sturdy stool near his workbench. "Let me see the damage." She lowered herself onto the stool with visible relief, though her spine remained rigid, as if sitting fully would be a surrender she could not afford. Up close, he could see more of the toll her journey had taken. Dirt streaked her face and arms, and her dark hair, braided in an intricate pattern that must have taken hours to achieve, was coming loose in several places. The armor itself was well made, better than most of what he had seen human soldiers wearing during the war. Someone had cared about keeping her alive. "The leather rotted through," she explained, touching the broken straps with careful fingers. "I tried to repair it myself, but I do not have the tools or the skill." Vance moved closer, examining the armor without touching it yet. The breastplate was steel, hammered and shaped with obvious expertise, but the straps that held it in place were indeed rotted beyond simple repair. He would need to replace them entirely, and that would mean removing the armor to work on it properly. "I will need to take it off to fix it right," he said, meeting her eyes. "Is that acceptable?" Something flickered in her expression, too quick for him to read, but she nodded. "Go ahead," she whispered, her voice dropping to something softer, almost vulnerable. He reached for the buckles on her right side, and her eyes locked onto his hands with an intensity that made his fingers fumble slightly on the first clasp. Vance had repaired armor countless times during the war, had even done it on the battlefield with soldiers bleeding and dying around him, but he had never felt quite so aware of his own movements. Her gaze followed every shift of his fingers, every adjustment he made as he worked to free the damaged straps without causing her more pain. "This will not hurt," he said quietly, more to fill the silence than because she seemed worried. "I know," she replied, but her eyes never left his hands. The breastplate came away with a soft scrape of metal on leather, and he set it carefully on the workbench. Beneath it, she wore a simple tunic, stained with sweat and blood. The bandage on her arm was even worse than he had thought, soaked through and tied with obvious desperation rather than skill. "That needs to be cleaned," he said, nodding at her arm, "the armor first." Her tone brooked no argument, though he could hear the strain beneath it. Vance wanted to argue, wanted to insist that her health mattered more than the armor, but he recognized the look in her eyes. She needed this fixed, needed to be able to protect herself before she could afford to show weakness. So he turned to his workbench and began assessing what he would need to complete the repair. The leather he had in stock was good quality, tanned and treated to resist the elements. He selected several strips that looked thick enough to bear the weight of the steel plate and began measuring them against the old straps. Behind him, he could hear her breathing, slow and controlled, the kind of breathing someone did when they were managing pain. "What is your name?" he asked, keeping his focus on his work. A long pause stretched between them before she answered. "Kara." "Vance," he replied, glancing back at her with what he hoped was a reassuring expression. "Vance Ryerson." "You were a soldier," Kara said, and it was not a question. He stilled for a moment, then continued working. "How did you know?" "The way you move. The scars on your hands. The fact that you closed the shutters before anyone could see me." She shifted slightly on the stool, and he heard the faint intake of breath that meant the movement had cost her. "You have seen enough death to know when to prevent more." Vance set down the leather strips and turned to face her fully. "I have seen enough death to be tired of it," he admitted. "The war is over. I would prefer to keep it that way." "The war is never over for people like me," Kara said, her voice bitter. "We are still monsters in your people's eyes, still targets." He could not argue with that, not when he had heard the things his neighbors said about orcs, the casual cruelty in their voices when they discussed the raids and battles of years past. Instead, he picked up the breastplate and began removing what remained of the old straps, prying out the rivets with careful precision. "What brought you here?" he asked. "To Thornmere. I was passing through, trying to reach the western mountains before winter sets in." She watched his hands again as he worked, her gaze tracking the movement of his fingers against the steel. "There was a fight on the road. Bandits who thought an orc alone would be easy prey." "They were wrong," Vance observed, noting the bloodstains that were definitely not all hers. A ghost of a smile touched her lips, though it held no humor. "They were wrong," she agreed, "but they damaged my armor before they learned that lesson." He finished removing the old straps and began preparing the new ones, cutting them to length and marking where the rivets would need to go. The work was familiar, soothing in its predictability, and he found himself falling into the comfortable rhythm of craftsmanship. Hammer, anvil, rivet, leather, each step followed the next with an inevitability that felt reassuring after years of chaos. Kara remained silent as he worked, but he could feel her watching him. Not with suspicion exactly, but with something more complex curiosity mixed with wariness, as if she was trying to understand why he was helping her. He supposed it was a fair question. Most humans would have turned her away or worse. The fact that he had not must seem strange to her. The truth was, Vance was not entirely sure why he had let her in. Perhaps it was exhaustion with hatred, or perhaps it was simply that he had spent too many years repairing the instruments of war and wanted, just once, to repair something for the sake of preserving life rather than taking it. Or maybe it was the look in her eyes when she had asked if he could fix the armor, desperate and proud and trying so hard not to show either emotion. He heated a rivet in the forge, the metal glowing orange in the dim light of the smithy, and carefully set it in place. The hammer came down with precise, controlled strikes, securing the new leather strap to the breastplate. One rivet, then another, each one a small restoration of the armor's integrity. "You are good at this," Kara said quietly. "I have had practice," Vance replied, moving to the next strap. "My father was a blacksmith. I grew up in this smithy, but you left to be a soldier." "I did not have much choice. The war came and they needed every man who could hold a weapon." He set another rivet, the sound of metal on metal ringing through the space. "I came back after it ended. My father had died while I was gone, left me the smithy and not much else." "I am sorry," Kara said, and there was genuine sympathy in her voice. "It was 3 years ago. I have made peace with it." Vance examined his work, checking the alignment of the straps. "What about you? Do you have family waiting in the western mountains?" Her expression closed off, and he knew immediately that he had touched a wound. "No," she said simply. "No family waiting." He did not press, returning his attention to the armor. The repair was coming together well, each strap secure and strong. It would hold, probably better than the original had. He found satisfaction in that, in the knowledge that his work would keep her safe. The sun was sinking lower outside, the light through the cracks in the shutters turning golden and then amber. Vance worked steadily, aware that once he finished, Kara would leave, and he would likely never see her again. The thought bothered him more than it should have, but he pushed it aside. There was no future in wondering about an orc woman passing through his village. No matter how intently she watched his hands, or how much her presence had disrupted the careful emptiness of his days. He set the final rivet and examined the breastplate critically. "That should hold," he said, turning to face her. "Let me help you put it back on." Kara stood slowly, and he saw her wince as the movement pulled at whatever injury she was hiding beneath that blood-soaked bandage. She moved closer, and he caught the scent of leather and sweat and something else, something that might have been pine or cedar. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted the breastplate, holding it in place while she slipped her arms through the straps. "Go ahead," she whispered again, giving him permission to buckle the armor into place. Vance secured the buckles on her right side first, then moved to the left, trying to be gentle near her injured arm. Her eyes never left his hands, following every movement with that same intense focus. This close, he could see the fine details of her face, the way her tusks curved just slightly upward, the small scar above her left eyebrow, the amber flecks in her green-brown eyes. "There," he said, stepping back to give her space. "Good as new. Better, probably." Kara rolled her shoulders experimentally, testing the fit of the repaired armor. A small smile crossed her face, genuine this time. "Thank you," she said. "How much do I owe you?" "Nothing," Vance replied before he could think better of it. "You needed help, I helped, that is all." She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "You are a strange human, Vance Ryerson. So I have been told." Kara reached for the purse at her belt, and he realized she was going to insist on paying despite his refusal. But before she could extract any coins, her face went pale and she swayed dangerously. Vance caught her before she could fall, his hands gripping her shoulders, and felt the heat radiating off her skin even through the armor. "You have a fever," he said, the pieces clicking together in his mind. "That arm wound is infected." "I will be fine," Kara insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. "You will be dead if you do not let me treat it." Vance guided her back to the stool with gentle firmness. "Sit down before you fall down." This time she did not argue. which told him more about her condition than any words could have. He moved quickly, gathering the supplies he kept for treating burns and cuts from the smithy work clean cloth, a bottle of strong spirits, a jar of salve his neighbor had given him last spring. It was not much, but it would have to do. "I need to remove that bandage," he said, kneeling beside the stool so he was at eye level with her arm. Kara nodded, her jaw tight. Vance unwrapped the bandage carefully, trying not to cause unnecessary pain, but he could see her fingers clenching into fists as he pulled away the fabric that had stuck to the wound. When he finally got a clear look at her arm, his stomach clenched. The cut was deep, a long slash that ran from just below her shoulder halfway to her elbow. It had been stitched, but the stitches were crude and uneven, and the flesh around them was angry red and swollen. He could see the beginnings of infection spreading from the wound site, and he knew that if it was not dealt with soon, she would be in real danger. "This is going to hurt," he warned, reaching for the bottle of spirits. "I know," Kara said, but her eyes met his with something that might have been trust. Vance poured the alcohol over the wound, and Kara's entire body went rigid. She did not cry out, did not make a sound, but he saw her tusks bite into her lower lip hard enough to draw blood. He worked as quickly as he could, cleaning away the infection and dead tissue, then applying the salve with gentle pressure. His hands were steady despite the way his heart was pounding, despite the awareness of how much pain he was causing her. When he finished, he wrapped her arm in clean cloth, binding it securely but not so tight that it would cut off circulation. Kara was breathing hard, her forehead sheened with sweat, but the worst was over. "You cannot travel tonight," Vance said firmly. "That fever needs to break and you need rest." "I cannot stay here," Kara protested. "If someone sees me, then we will make sure no one sees you." He stood, moving to the door that led from the smithy into his living quarters. "Come, you can rest in my room. It is at the back of the house, away from the street." Kara followed him slowly, each step careful and measured. His living space was sparse: a bedroom, a small kitchen, a sitting area with a fireplace that he rarely used. He led her to the bedroom and gestured at the bed, which suddenly looked very small and very intimate. "I will sleep out by the forge," he said quickly. "You take the bed." "I cannot." "You can and you will." Vance softened his tone. "Please, Kara, let me help you." She looked at him for a long moment, and he saw the exact instant she stopped fighting. Her shoulders sagged and she nodded, moving to sit on the edge of the bed. Vance found a clean shirt in his chest of drawers and handed it to her. "This will be more comfortable than that tunic," he said. "I will be outside if you need anything." He left before she could argue further, closing the door behind him and leaning against it for a moment. His hands were shaking now, the adrenaline of the last hour catching up with him. An orc woman was in his bed, wounded and feverish, and he had no idea what he was going to do if someone discovered her presence. The rational part of his mind said he should wake her at first light and send her on her way, before the risk became too great. But another part of him, the part that had seen too much death and cruelty during the war, said that he would do no such thing. Kara needed help, and he was going to provide it, regardless of the consequences. Vance banked the forge and settled onto the cot. He kept in the smithy for nights, when he worked too late to bother walking the 20 feet to his actual bed. Sleep did not come easily. He kept listening for sounds from the bedroom, half afraid that her fever would spike or that she would try to leave despite her condition. But the house remained quiet, and eventually, exhaustion pulled him under. He woke before dawn to the sound of movement in the bedroom. Vance rose quickly, moving to the door and knocking softly. "Kara, are you all right?" The door opened, and she stood there in his shirt, which hung nearly to her knees. The fever had broken. He could see that immediately in the clearer focus of her eyes and the better color in her cheeks. But she still looked exhausted, wrung out by pain and illness. "I was looking for water," she admitted. "Sit," he said, gesturing at the table in the small kitchen. "I will get you some." He poured water from the pitcher he kept on the counter and set it in front of her, then began preparing breakfast. It was nothing fancy: bread, cheese, some dried fruit, but it was food, and she needed to eat. Kara watched him move around the kitchen with that same intense focus she had given his hands the day before. "You do not have to do this," she said quietly. "I know," Vance replied, setting the food on the table between them. "But I want to." They ate in silence, the early morning light beginning to filter through the windows. Outside, Vance could hear the village coming to life: the baker opening his shop, the farmer driving his cart toward the fields, the children calling to each other as they began their chores. Normal sounds of a normal day, which made the situation inside his house feel even more surreal. "How is your arm?" he asked. Kara flexed it carefully. "Better. The pain is less. Good. But you should stay another day. Let the infection clear completely before you travel." He expected her to argue, but she just nodded, her gaze dropping to the table. "Thank you," she said softly. "I know what a risk this is for you." "We all take risks," Vance said. "The question is whether they are worth it." "And is this worth it?" Kara asked, meeting his eyes. "Am I worth it?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications he was not ready to examine. But he answered honestly, the only way he knew how. "Yes." The day passed in a strange sort of domesticity that Vance had not experienced since before the war. Kara rested in the sitting room while he worked in the smithy, taking on the simple repairs that local farmers brought him: a broken plow blade, a cracked horseshoe, a knife that needed sharpening. But his mind was not fully on his work. He kept thinking about the woman in his house, about the way she had watched his hands, about the trust she had placed in him despite every reason not to. Around midday, he brought her lunch and found her examining the books on his shelf. They were mostly technical manuals about metalworking and a few histories his father had collected, but she seemed fascinated by them. "Can you raid?" he asked, then immediately regretted the question. It sounded condescending, as if he assumed orcs could not be educated. But Kara did not take offense. "Some," she said. "My mother taught me before she died. She believed knowledge was the only thing that could not be taken from us." "Your mother sounds wise." "She was." Kara pulled down one of the histories, running her fingers over the worn leather cover. "She also believed that humans and orcs could live in peace, that the war was a failure of leadership rather than an inevitability of our natures." "What do you believe?" Vance asked. Kara looked at him, her expression serious. "I believed she was naive, that peace was impossible, that humans would always see us as monsters." She paused. "But then I met a human blacksmith who closed his shutters to hide me, who repaired my armor without asking for payment, who is risking his safety to let me recover in his home. So perhaps I do not know what to believe anymore." Vance felt something shift in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the forge and everything to do with the way she was looking at him. He wanted to say something profound, something that would capture the strange connection growing between them, but the words would not come. Instead, he simply said, "You should eat. You need your strength." They shared the meal in companionable silence, and Vance found himself noticing small things: the way Kara held her fork, the small crinkle that appeared between her eyebrows when she was thinking, the grace in her movements despite her injury. She was beautiful, he realized, though it was not a conventional beauty by human standards. There was strength in the lines of her face, a fierce intelligence in her eyes, and a vulnerability she tried to hide but which showed through in unguarded moments. After lunch, Kara insisted on helping him with small tasks around the smithy, and he did not have the heart to refuse her. She proved to have a good eye for quality and a steady hand for detail work. They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side, and Vance was surprised by how natural it felt. He had been alone for so long that he had forgotten the comfort of companionship, the simple pleasure of sharing space with someone who understood the value of both conversation and silence. As evening approached, Vance prepared dinner while Kara set the table, and the domesticity of the scene struck him with sudden force. This was what he had been missing without realizing it, not just company, but connection. Someone to share meals with, to exchange stories with, to simply exist beside without the weight of expectations or pretense. "Tell me about your life before the war," Kara said as they ate. "What was it like growing up here?" Vance considered the question, sorting through memories that felt like they belonged to a different person. "Simple," he said finally. "I worked in the smithy with my father, learned the trade. There was a girl I thought I might marry someday, but she wed someone else while I was at war. The village was smaller then, quieter. People knew each other, helped each other. And now it is different. The war changed things. People are harder, more suspicious, less willing to give anyone the benefit of the doubt." He met her eyes. Present company excluded, Kara smiled slightly. "What made you different? Why did you help me when your neighbors would not have?" "I do not know," Vance admitted. "Maybe I am tired of following rules that make no sense. Maybe I am just tired in general. Or maybe I saw something in your eyes that reminded me we are all just trying to survive, regardless of what we look like." "That is a dangerous way to think," Kara said softly. "Dangerous for both of us." "I have never been particularly good at staying safe," Vance replied. They talked long into the evening, sharing stories of their pasts, their losses, their hopes for the future. Vance learned that Kara had been a warrior in her clan, that she had lost her family during a raid 3 years ago, that she was traveling to the western mountains to find a new clan rumored to be more accepting of those who did not fit traditional roles. Kara learned that Vance had been a cavalry officer during the war, that he still had nightmares about the things he had seen and done, that he had returned to Thornmere because he did not know where else to go, but had never quite felt like he belonged here anymore. "We are both lost," Kara observed as the candles burned low. "Maybe," Vance agreed. "Or maybe we are both just looking for something different than what we have been told we are supposed to want." When they finally retired for the night, Kara to his bedroom, Vance to the cot in the smithy, he lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling and trying to understand what was happening. He barely knew this woman, and yet he felt more connected to her than he had to anyone in years. It was foolish, he told himself. Dangerous. She would leave in the morning and he would never see her again, and that would be for the best. But even as he thought it, he knew he did not believe it. Morning came too quickly. Vance woke to find Kara already up, her armor buckled in place, her pack by the door. She looked stronger, the fever and infection conquered, and he knew there was no longer any reason for her to stay. "You are leaving," he said, and it was not a question. "I have imposed on your kindness long enough," Kara replied. "And the longer I stay, the greater the danger to you." "Where will you go?" "West, as planned. There are still several days of travel before I reach the mountains, but I should be able to make it before the weather turns." Vance wanted to ask her to stay, wanted to give her reasons why leaving was a terrible idea, but he had no right. They were strangers, bound only by circumstance and a few conversations. She had her own life, her own goals, and they did not include a human blacksmith in a backwater village. "Be careful," he said instead. "And if you ever need armor repaired again, you know where to find me." Kara smiled, but there was sadness in it. Thank you, Vance, for everything. I will not forget your kindness. She moved toward the door, and Vance felt something fracturing inside him, a sense that he was making a terrible mistake by letting her walk away. But before he could find the words to stop her, the door burst open, and 3 men from the village crowded into the smithy. "We saw an orc coming to your smithy 2 days ago," the tallest one said, his hand on the sword at his belt. "And we have been watching since then." "Where is it, Ryerson?" Vance stepped between the men and Kara, his heart pounding but his voice steady. "She is leaving. There is no trouble here." "No trouble?" The man's face flushed red with anger. "You are harboring one of them. During the war they killed my brother. They destroyed half the valley, and you are protecting one. The war is over," Vance said firmly. "And she has done nothing to harm anyone. I repaired her armor." "She is leaving. That is the end of it." "You are a traitor," one of the other men spat. "You should hang for this." Vance felt Kara tense behind him, felt her preparing to fight despite being outnumbered. "No one is hanging today," he said, his voice dropping to the tone he had used as an officer, the one that expected to be obeyed. "This woman came here for help, and I helped her. If you have a problem with that, you can take it up with me after she is gone. But she is leaving now, and you are going to let her pass." "Or what?" the tall man challenged, his hand tightening on his sword hilt. "Or I will remind you that I spent 4 years leading cavalry charges against trained soldiers, and I am not particularly afraid of 3 farmers with more anger than sense," Vance said coldly. "Now move aside." For a long moment, the standoff held, tension crackling in the air like lightning before a storm. Then the tall man's eyes shifted, looking past Vance to Kara, and something in his expression changed. Not softening exactly, but becoming less certain. "We are watching you, Ryerson," he said finally, stepping back. "This is not over." The 3 men left, though not without throwing dark looks over their shoulders. Vance waited until they were out of sight before turning to Kara, who was looking at him with an expression he could not quite read. "You should not have done that," she said quietly. "Now they will make your life difficult." "They were already making my life difficult," Vance replied. "At least this way I made it count." "I am sorry," Kara said, and he could hear the genuine regret in her voice. "I should never have come here." "No," Vance said firmly, surprising himself with his vehemence. "I am not sorry. I would do it again." Kara studied him for a long moment, and then, so slowly that he almost thought he imagined it, she reached out and took his hand. Her palm was warm against his, calloused from weapon work but gentle in the touch. "Come with me," she said. Vance stared at her, certain he had misheard. "What? Come with me to the Western Mountains? You said yourself that you do not belong here anymore, that the village changed." Kara's grip on his hand tightened. "We could find a new place together, somewhere neither of us has to hide." "I cannot just leave," Vance protested, though even as he said it, he was wondering why not. "The smithy will be taken from you by those men or others like them as soon as they work up the courage," Kara interrupted. "You know I am right. They will never forgive you for helping me. Your life here is over." She was right, and he knew it. The moment those men had walked in and seen Kara, his fate in Thornmere was sealed. He could stay and fight, could try to weather the storm of anger and suspicion, but eventually they would drive him out or worse. The war might be officially over, but hatred did not end with treaties. "I know nothing about the Western Mountains," he said, but it was a weak argument and they both knew it. "You know blacksmithing. That is valuable anywhere." Kara's eyes searched his face. "And you know how to see past what people look like to who they are. That is even more valuable." Vance looked around the smithy, at the tools his father had used, at the forge that had been the center of his world for so long. Leaving meant abandoning everything he had known, stepping into uncertainty with a woman he barely knew. It was foolish, reckless, the kind of decision that would probably end badly. But it was also the first thing that had felt right in 3 years. "All right," he said. "I will come with you." Kara's face lit up with a smile that transformed her features, chasing away the guardedness and revealing genuine joy. "Truly, truly," Vance confirmed and found himself smiling back. "Give me an hour to pack supplies and close up the smithy. Then we leave." The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Vance gathered his tools, his clothes, food for the journey, and what little money he had saved. He wrote a brief note explaining that he was leaving, and that anyone who wanted to could take over the smithy. It seemed wrong to let the place fall into disrepair, even if he could no longer stay. Then he barred the doors, shouldered his pack, and turned to face Kara. "Ready?" she asked. "As I will ever be," Vance replied. They left Thornmere by the western road, walking side by side in the early morning light. Vance did not look back. Whatever lay behind him was the past, and he had spent too long living there already. The future was uncertain, probably dangerous, definitely complicated, but it was his choice, and that made all the difference. They walked through the day, keeping a steady pace that ate up the miles without exhausting them. The terrain gradually shifted from farmland to rolling hills to the beginnings of true wilderness. They saw few other travelers, and those they did pass gave them strange looks but did not interfere. By evening, they were far enough from Thornmere that Vance began to relax slightly. They made camp in a small clearing beside a stream, and Vance set about building a fire while Kara tended to her arm, changing the bandage with supplies he had packed. The wound looked much better, the angry redness fading to a healthier pink, and he was relieved to see it healing properly. "Tell me about this clan in the western mountains," Vance said as they settled around the fire to eat. "What makes them different?" "They are led by a chieftain named Gora who believes that strength comes from unity, not purity," Kara explained. "She has welcomed outcasts from other clans, even a few humans who were fleeing persecution. It is said to be a place where you are judged by your actions, not your bloodline." "And you believe this place exists?" "I have to," Kara said simply. "Because if it does not, then I truly have nowhere to go." They ate in companionable silence, the crackling of the fire and the burbling of the stream the only sounds. Night fell around them and the stars emerged, brighter than Vance had seen them in years. The sky in Thornmere had always seemed dimmed by smoke and clouds, but out here, the constellations blazed with crystalline clarity. "I used to look at the stars during the war," Vance said quietly. "It was the only thing that felt real sometimes. Everything else was mud and blood and death, but the stars stayed constant. My mother told me that the stars were the spirits of ancestors watching over us," Kara replied, "that they guided us even when we felt most lost. You believe that?" "I do not know what I believe anymore," Kara admitted, "but I like the idea of it, that someone is watching, that we are not truly alone." "You are not alone," Vance said, meeting her eyes across the fire. "Not anymore." Kara held his gaze and something passed between them, a recognition that went deeper than words. They were both refugees from lives that no longer fit, both searching for something they could not quite name. But perhaps, Vance thought, they had already found it in each other. They took turns keeping watch that night, though the wilderness remained quiet. When Vance woke for his shift, he found Kara already awake, staring into the dying embers of the fire. "Could not sleep?" he asked, settling beside her. "Too many thoughts," she replied. "Too many questions." Such as whether I am being selfish, dragging you away from your home, whether this clan I am seeking even exists, whether—" She trailed off, but Vance could guess what she was not saying. "Whether this is real," he finished softly. "Whatever is growing between us." Kara nodded, not meeting his eyes. Vance reached out and gently turned her face toward his. "I cannot answer all your questions," he said, "but I can tell you this. I did not leave Thornmere because you dragged me away. I left because staying meant slowly dying inside, turning bitter and hard like the men who wanted to hurt you. And as for whether this is real..." He touched her cheek, feeling the warmth of her skin under his palm. "It is the most real thing I have felt in years." Kara leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. When they opened again, they were bright with unshed tears. "I am afraid," she whispered. "Afraid of hoping for something I cannot have." "Then we will be afraid together," Vance said, "and we will hope together. And whatever happens, we will face it together." He closed the distance between them slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But Kara did not pull away. Instead, she met him halfway, her lips finding his in a kiss that was gentle and tentative and full of unspoken promises. She tasted like smoke and honey, and Vance felt something settle into place inside him, a rightness he had not known he was seeking. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Kara rested her forehead against his. "I have never kissed a human before," she admitted with a small laugh. "I have never kissed an orc before," Vance replied, smiling, "but I would very much like to do it again." "Yes," Kara agreed, and this time when they kissed, it was with more confidence, more certainty. They held each other as the stars wheeled overhead, two souls finding solace in the middle of nowhere, and Vance thought that perhaps his mother's star stories were true after all. Perhaps the universe did guide the lost toward what they needed most. The days that followed fell into a pattern. They walked from dawn until dusk, covering ground steadily as the landscape grew more rugged and the mountains loomed larger on the horizon. At night, they made camp and talked, sharing stories and dreams and fears. And slowly, the connection between them deepened from attraction to something more profound. Vance learned that Kara had a wicked sense of humor hidden beneath her warrior's stoicism, that she could identify plants and tracks with equal expertise, that she sang quietly to herself when she thought he was not listening. Kara learned that Vance had a philosophical streak that came out when he was tired, that he was surprisingly good at cooking with limited ingredients, that he had nightmares about the war but never wanted to talk about them afterward. They complemented each other in ways that surprised them both. Where Vance was cautious, Kara was bold. Where Kara was guarded, Vance was open. They covered each other's weaknesses and celebrated each other's strengths, and the journey became less about reaching a destination and more about the time they spent traveling together. On the 5th day, they encountered their first real challenge. The road narrowed to a mountain pass where 3 men stood blocking the way. Not farmers this time, but hardened mercenaries with the look of those who killed for coin. "That is far enough," the leader said, stepping forward. "You want to pass through our territory, you pay the toll. We have no interest in trouble," Vance said calmly. "We will pay a reasonable toll. Reasonable is whatever we say it is." The mercenary's eyes fixed on Kara. "Though we might be willing to negotiate if the orc stays with us." Vance felt Kara stiffen beside him and knew she was preparing to fight. But 3 armed mercenaries were dangerous odds, especially when one of them already had an arrow nocked and aimed in their direction. "How much?" Vance asked, buying time to think. "Everything you have," the leader said with an ugly smile. "Packs, weapons, and the orc." "That is not happening," Vance said flatly. The mercenary shrugged. "Then you die here." The archer drew back his bow, and Vance knew they were out of time for talking. He grabbed Kara and dove sideways just as the arrow hissed through the space where they had been standing. They rolled behind a large boulder, and Vance heard the mercenaries advancing. "Ideas?" he asked Kara urgently. "We fight," she replied, drawing the long knife from her belt. "There is no other option. 3 against 2, bad odds. I have fought worse." Kara's eyes were hard, her warrior's training taking over. "You take the archer, I will handle the other 2. That is a terrible plan." "You have a better one." Vance did not, so he nodded. They burst from cover simultaneously, Vance charging the archer while Kara went for the 2 swordsmen. The archer tried to knock another arrow but was not fast enough. Vance crashed into him, and they went down in a tangle of limbs. The fight was brutal and quick. Vance's war training came back despite years of disuse, and he used every dirty trick he had learned in 4 years of combat. A knee to the gut, an elbow to the face, fingers searching for vulnerable spots. The archer fought back hard, but Vance was fueled by desperation, and the knowledge that if he fell, Kara would face all 3 alone. He managed to get the archer's knife away from him and used the pommel to strike the man unconscious. Then he spun to help Kara and found her standing over the 2 swordsmen, both of whom were bleeding and backing away slowly. "Go," Kara growled, her knife dripping red. "Before I decide, mercy is overrated." The swordsmen ran, dragging their unconscious companion with them. Vance and Kara stood in the middle of the pass, breathing hard and covered in bruises but alive. "Are you hurt?" Vance asked, scanning her for injuries. "Nothing serious. You, the same." He reached out and pulled her into a fierce embrace, feeling the adrenaline slowly drain away. "That was too close." "We survived," Kara said into his shoulder. "That is what matters." They held each other for a long moment before continuing through the pass. Neither spoke much for the rest of the day, each lost in their own thoughts about how quickly things could have gone wrong. But that night, as they made camp, Kara moved her bedroll closer to his, and they fell asleep with their hands clasped between them. The mountains grew taller and steeper as they traveled west. The air became thinner and colder, and Vance was grateful for the extra blankets he had packed. They passed through small settlements occasionally, places where humans and orcs eyed each other with suspicion, but were too focused on survival to indulge in open warfare. In one such village, they heard rumors of the clan Kara sought. It was said to be 3 days further west, in a valley protected by steep cliffs and careful watchfulness. The rumors also warned that the clan did not welcome visitors easily, that they had been betrayed before and were cautious about whom they allowed into their territory. "We will have to convince them," Kara said as they left the village. "Prove that we are serious about joining them." "How do we do that?" Vance asked. "I do not know yet," Kara admitted, "but we will find a way." 2 days later, they encountered a scouting party from the clan. 5 orcs, all warriors, all regarding them with suspicion and weapons half drawn. "State your business," the leader said, a tall female orc with scars crossing her face and arms. "I seek to join Chieftain Gora's clan," Kara replied, standing tall despite her exhaustion. "I am Kara, formerly of the Bloodrock clan. I bring my skills as a warrior and my companion, a human blacksmith." The scouts looked at Vance with even greater suspicion. "Why would we want a human?" one asked. "Because a smith who can work with metal is valuable regardless of his race," Kara replied firmly. "And because he has proven his loyalty to me, even at great cost to himself." The lead scout studied them both for a long moment. "Chieftain Gora will decide," she said finally. "You will come with us. But know that if you prove false, you will not leave our valley alive." "Understood," Kara said. They were escorted through narrow mountain paths that would have been impossible to find without a guide. Vance saw evidence of the clan's defensive preparations, rockfalls that could be triggered to block the passes, elevated positions perfect for archers, hidden lookouts watching their approach. These orcs had learned to be careful, and he respected that. Finally, they crested a ridge and looked down into a valley that took Vance's breath away. Green meadows spread between stands of pine trees, and a river ran through the center, its water clear and cold from mountain snowmelt. Structures dotted the valley floor, not the crude huts he had been taught orcs lived in, but solid buildings of stone and timber, well made and permanent, and there were humans here too. Not many, but he could see them working alongside orcs, building, farming, living. It was everything Kara had described and more. They were brought to the largest building, a long hall with carved pillars and a roof that seemed to grow out of the mountainside itself. Inside, seated on a simple chair of worked stone, was an orc woman who could only be Chieftain Gora. She was not what Vance expected. Older, with gray threading through her dark hair, and smaller than most of the warriors he had seen. But there was a presence about her, an authority that filled the room without need for bluster or threat. "Kara of the Bloodrock clan," Gora said, her voice deep and measured. "I have heard that name before. You were a warrior of some renown during the war." "I fought," Kara replied simply. "As did many." "And you," Gora turned her attention to Vance. "A human who travels with an orc and seeks to join our clan. That is unusual. Explain." Vance stepped forward, meeting the chieftain's eyes without flinching. "I am Vance Ryerson, a blacksmith and former cavalry officer. I left my village because I helped Kara when she was injured, and my people could not forgive that. I came here because I believe what I have heard about this place, that you judge people by their actions, not their race, and because—" He glanced at Kara, "because she is worth following." Gora's expression remained neutral, but Vance thought he saw a flicker of approval in her eyes. "Pretty words. But words are easy. What would you offer this clan if we allowed you to stay?" "My skills as a smith," Vance replied. "I can forge weapons, repair armor, craft tools. I was trained by my father, who was considered one of the best smiths in our region. And I offer my loyalty not blindly, but given freely to a leader who rules with wisdom rather than cruelty." "And you, Kara," Gora asked, "what do you offer beyond your sword arm?" "I offer the same loyalty," Kara said, "and the determination to build something better than what the war left us. I am tired of hatred, tired of fighting. I want to be part of something that grows instead of destroys." Gora was silent for a long moment, studying them both. Then she stood, and Vance saw that, despite her smaller stature, she was no less formidable up close. "You may stay," she said finally, "for a trial period, 3 months. In that time you will work, you will contribute, and you will prove whether your words match your actions. If you do well, you will be welcomed as full members of this clan. If you prove false or fail to integrate, you will be asked to leave. Do you accept these terms?" "Yes," Kara and Vance said together. "Good." Gora nodded to the scouts. "Find them a dwelling and assign them work duties. And Vance Ryerson, report to our current smith tomorrow. If your skills are as good as you claim, he will be grateful for the help." They were dismissed and led to a small but well-built cabin on the edge of the valley. It had 2 rooms, a fireplace, and windows that looked out on the mountains. It was simple, but it was theirs, and after weeks of sleeping on the ground, it felt like a palace. "We made it," Kara said, standing in the middle of the main room and turning slowly, as if she could not quite believe it was real. "We did," Vance agreed, dropping his pack and moving to stand beside her. "Now we just have to prove we belong here." Kara turned to face him, her expression serious. "Do you regret coming, leaving your old life behind?" "Not for a single moment," Vance said truthfully. He reached out and cupped her face in his hands. "This, here with you, is the first time I have felt like I had a future worth working toward." Kara's eyes shone with emotion as she leaned in to kiss him. It was a kiss that spoke of relief and joy and the beginning of something neither of them had quite dared to hope for. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "So what now?" Kara asked. "Now we build a life," Vance said simply. "Together." The next 3 months were a whirlwind of activity. Vance reported to the clan's smith, a grizzled old orc named Thrak who tested his skills rigorously before grudgingly admitting that the human knew his craft. They worked side by side, repairing tools and weapons, and gradually developed a mutual respect that surprised them both. Kara joined the warriors' training, though she also spent time helping with construction projects and learning about the valley's defenses. She fit into the clan more easily than Vance had expected, her skills and straightforward manner earning her acceptance. The humans in the valley were a mixed group: refugees from villages destroyed in the war, criminals fleeing justice who had found redemption here, and a few like Vance who had simply chosen to live differently. They welcomed him cautiously but without hostility, and he found himself making friends for the first time in years. But it was the evenings that Vance treasured most, when he and Kara would return to their cabin and share meals, stories, and increasing intimacy. They learned each other's bodies with the same patience and attention they had given to learning each other's minds, and Vance discovered that the connection they shared went far beyond physical attraction. He loved the way Kara laughed, full-throated and unrestrained. He loved her fierce loyalty and her gentle heart, the way she could command a training ground but would spend hours tending an injured bird she had found in the forest. He loved waking up beside her and falling asleep in her arms, loved the future they were building one day at a time. And Kara, for her part, fell deeply for the human blacksmith who had risked everything for her. She loved his steady hands and steadier heart, the way he approached every task with patient precision. She loved his kindness and his hidden depths, the poetry in his soul that emerged in quiet moments. She loved that he saw her not as an orc or a warrior, but simply as Kara, complete and valued for exactly who she was. When the 3-month trial period ended, Chieftain Gora summoned them both to the long hall. Vance felt nervous despite the positive reports he knew Thrak had given, despite the friends they had made and the life they were building. "Vance Ryerson and Kara, formerly of Bloodrock," Gora said formally, her voice carrying through the hall where many clan members had gathered. "You have completed your trial period. The reports I have received speak well of your work ethic, your skills, and your integration into this community. Therefore, I am pleased to welcome you as full members of this clan, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails." A cheer went up from the assembled clan members, and Vance felt Kara's hand find his, squeezing tight. They had done it. They had found a place to belong, but Gora was not finished. "There is one more matter to address," she said, her eyes twinkling slightly. "It has not escaped my notice that you two share a dwelling and, from all accounts, share a life as well. In this clan, we formalize such unions with a bonding ceremony. Would you wish to undertake this?" Vance looked at Kara and saw his own surprise and joy reflected in her face. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "If Kara will have me, if I will have you," Kara laughed, and there were tears in her eyes. "Yes, you ridiculous human. Yes." The bonding ceremony took place a week later under the stars at the center of the valley. It was nothing like the formal weddings Vance had witnessed in Thornmere, with their rigid traditions and solemn vows. Instead, it was a celebration of community and commitment, with clan members from both orc and human backgrounds participating. Gora presided over the ceremony, speaking about the courage it took to forge new paths and the strength found in unity despite difference. Vance and Kara exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to stand beside each other through whatever challenges came, to build a future together, to honor the connection that had drawn them together against all odds. When Gora declared them bonded, the celebration that followed was joyous and loud, with music and dancing and enough food to feed twice their number. Vance danced with Kara under the stars, held her close as the clan celebrated around them, and thought that he had never imagined this kind of happiness was possible. Later, when they returned to their cabin, now truly their home, Kara stopped him at the threshold. "You remember the day we met?" she asked softly. "When I stood in your smithy doorway, broken and desperate." "I remember," Vance said. "I remember thinking that I should be afraid, but I was not. I was just curious. I remember watching your hands as you repaired my armor," Kara continued. "The care you took, the precision. I remember thinking that anyone who worked with such gentleness could not be the monster I had been taught humans were. And I remember thinking that I wanted those hands to hold me someday." "They can hold you every day now," Vance said, suiting action to words as he pulled her close. "For the rest of our lives." "Promise?" Kara asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Promise," Vance replied and sealed it with a kiss. The seasons turned and their life in the valley settled into a comfortable rhythm. Vance and Thrak expanded the smithy, taking on an apprentice, a young half-orc girl who showed exceptional talent. Kara became a training leader for the warriors, her experience and skill making her a natural teacher. Together, they became integral parts of the clan's fabric, respected and valued. They faced challenges, of course. There were still those in nearby human settlements who viewed the mixed clan with suspicion, and occasional conflicts arose that required careful diplomacy. But Chieftain Gora navigated these waters with skill, and the clan continued to grow and thrive. A year after their bonding, Kara came to Vance in the smithy with news that made his hands forget their work. She was pregnant, carrying their child, something neither of them had been certain was even possible given their different races. But the clan's healer confirmed it, and suddenly their future expanded in ways they had not dared to imagine. "Are you afraid?" Kara asked that night as they lay in bed, her hand resting on the slight swell of her belly. "Terrified," Vance admitted, "but also more excited than I have ever been. We are going to have a child, Kara, our child. Do you think they will face difficulties, being neither fully orc nor fully human?" "Probably," Vance said honestly. "But they will also have something neither of us had, growing up parents who love each other across every divide, who chose to build something new rather than accept what they were told was possible. That has to count for something." "It counts for everything," Kara said softly. Their daughter was born on a spring morning when the valley was thick with wildflowers and the air smelled of new growth. She had her mother's green-tinted skin, though lighter than Kara's deep emerald, and her father's gray eyes. Tiny tusks were just visible when she yawned, and her pointed ears were delicate as flower petals. She was perfect, and they named her Elara, which meant star-light in the old Orcish tongue. Elara's birth seemed to mark a turning point for the clan. More mixed couples emerged from the shadows, emboldened by Vance and Kara's example. More children were born who belonged to both worlds and neither, who would grow up knowing that love and family transcended the boundaries others tried to impose. The years passed, marked by the ordinary miracles of daily life. Elara's first steps, her first words, her endless questions about the world. The expansion of the smithy into a true workshop that produced goods traded throughout the region. Kara's continued rise in the clan's warrior hierarchy until she stood as Gora's second in command. The quiet contentment of a life built with patience and love. Vance often thought back to that day when Kara had first appeared in his smithy doorway, desperate and injured and trying so hard to hide her fear. He thought about how close he had come to turning her away, to choosing safety over compassion. And he thanked whatever force in the universe had given him the courage to make a different choice. On their 5th bonding anniversary, they stood together at the ridge overlooking the valley, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of amber and rose. Alara played nearby with other children, her laughter ringing clear in the evening air. "You ever miss your old life?" Kara asked, leaning into Vance's warmth. "Never," he replied without hesitation. "This is my life. You, Alara, this clan, this place. Everything before was just before." "I used to think happiness was something other people had," Kara said quietly. "Something that was not meant for those of us who carried weapons and bore scars. But you taught me differently." "You taught me too," Vance said, turning to face her fully. "You taught me that courage is not about fighting. It is about choosing to hope when every experience tells you not to. It is about believing in something better, even when the world says it is impossible." Kara smiled, and Vance saw in her face the woman who had watched his hands repair her armor with such intensity, the warrior who had whispered, "Go ahead," and trusted him with her safety. But he also saw the mother, the leader, the partner who had built a life beside him more rich and full than he had ever imagined possible. "I love you," he said, because even after 5 years, the words still needed to be spoken. "I love you too," Kara replied, and kissed him as the sun sank below the mountains and their daughter's laughter echoed through the valley they called home. Time continued its steady march. Alara grew into a bright, confident child who moved between the orc and human communities of the clan with equal ease, learning weapon craft from her mother and metalwork from her father. Chieftain Gora grew older but no less formidable, grooming Kara to eventually take her place as leader. The clan expanded, welcoming more refugees and outcasts who sought a place where they could simply be themselves. Vance's smithy became renowned throughout the region, not just for the quality of its work, but for the fact that it was run by a human-orc partnership. People came from distant valleys to trade, and each visitor returned home with stories of the strange clan where old hatreds had been set aside in favor of building something new. There were still difficulties, of course. Raiders occasionally tested the valley's defenses, and not every newcomer successfully integrated into the community. But the clan had grown strong, united by shared purpose rather than shared bloodline, and they weathered each challenge together. On Alara's 10th birthday, Vance and Kara took her to the spot where they had first kissed, that clearing by the stream where they had allowed themselves to hope for a future together. The place had become special to them over the years, a reminder of how far they had traveled both literally and figuratively. "Papa, tell me again how you and Mama met," Alara demanded, settling on a fallen log with the confidence of a child who knew she was deeply loved. Vance glanced at Kara, and they shared a smile full of private meaning. "Your mother came to my smithy one day," he began, broken and desperate and trying so hard to be brave. "She needed her armor repaired. And Papa let me in even though it was dangerous." Kara continued the familiar story. "He could have turned me away, but he did not. He chose kindness over fear. Mama watched Papa's hands while he worked," Alara recited, having heard the story countless times. "She said she had never seen such gentleness." "I still watch his hands," Kara admitted, reaching out to take Vance's hand in hers. "They still amaze me." "And then Papa came with Mama to find a new home," Alara finished. "And they found this valley and had me and lived happily ever after." "Not quite ever after yet," Vance said with a laugh. "We are still living it, but yes, happily." Alara considered this seriously. "Will I find someone to live happily with someday, if you want to," Kara said. but the most important thing is to find happiness within yourself first. A partner should add to your joy, not create it entirely. Your mother is very wise, Vance said. I know, Alara replied with the matter-of-fact confidence of childhood. That is why she is going to be chieftain someday. The formal transfer of leadership happened 2 years later, when Gora decided she had earned her retirement. The ceremony was elaborate by the clan standards, with representatives from every family bearing witness as Kara took the oath of leadership. Vance stood beside her, not as chieftain himself but as her partner and advisor, and felt his heart swell with pride. I never imagined this, Kara told him that night, alone in their cabin after the celebrations had finally ended. When I stood in your smithy doorway, broken and afraid, I never imagined I would someday lead a clan, that I would have a family, that I would be happy. You have worked for all of it, Vance said firmly. Your skills, your wisdom, your compassion, they earned you this position. The clan chose well. The clan chose someone who learned from the best example, Kara replied, touching his face gently. A human blacksmith who taught me that strength and gentleness are not opposites, that building is harder but more valuable than destroying, that love is worth every risk. I learned just as much from you, Vance insisted. You taught me courage, real courage, not the battlefield kind. The courage to be vulnerable, to hope, to build a life outside the narrow confines I had been taught to accept. They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity mixed with fresh appreciation, celebrating not just Kara's new role but the journey that had brought them to this moment. And later, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Vance reflected on the strange paths that life took. If someone had told him, that day Kara first appeared in his smithy, that she would become his wife, the mother of his child and the leader of a clan he would proudly call his own, he would have thought them mad. But here he was, living that impossible future, and it was better than any fate he could have planned for himself. The years of Kara's leadership were marked by growth and increasing stability. She expanded trade relationships with neighboring communities, built alliances with other mixed clans that had begun to emerge, and strengthened the valley's defenses without becoming militaristic. Under her guidance, the clan grew into a true power in the region, respected even by those who disapproved of its mixed nature. Vance continued his work in the smithy, training apprentices and developing new techniques that blended orcish and human metalworking traditions. His reputation spread far enough that he occasionally received visitors from distant lands seeking to learn from him. Each one left with not just knowledge of smithcraft, but stories of the remarkable community they had witnessed. Alara grew into a young woman who embodied the best of both her parents' peoples. Strong and skilled like her mother, thoughtful and creative like her father, she moved through the world with confidence born of knowing exactly who she was and where she belonged. When she chose to become a ranger, patrolling the mountain passes and protecting travelers, both Vance and Kara supported her choice even as they worried about the dangers. She is her mother's daughter, Vance said one evening as they watched Alara prepare for a patrol. Brave and fierce and determined to make the world better. She is her father's daughter too, Kara replied, kind and thoughtful and willing to give anyone a chance. She is her own person, Alara called over, having heard them despite the distance. With her own annoying parents who worry too much. They laughed, and Vance felt the deep contentment that came from knowing his family was exactly where they should be, doing exactly what they should do. 20 years after that day when Kara first walked into his smithy, Vance found himself standing in almost the same spot, working on a delicate repair to a young warrior's armor. The warrior was human, and the armor had been damaged in a training accident, and Vance felt the familiar rhythm of his craft settle over him like a comfortable cloak. But this time, when he looked up, it was not Kara standing in the doorway but a young orc man, injured and desperate and trying very hard to be brave. "Can you help me?" the young man asked, his voice rough with pain. "I heard there was a human smith here who did not turn away those who needed help." Vance set down his tools and smiled, seeing in this young man's eyes the same desperate hope he had seen in Kara's all those years ago. "Come in," he said, moving to close the shutters out of old habit. "Let me see what you need." As he worked on the young man's injuries, explaining where he could find lodging and how to petition for sanctuary with the clan, Vance thought about circles and cycles, about how every act of kindness rippled outward in ways that could never be fully predicted. He had helped one desperate orc woman, and it had changed his entire life. Now he was helping another, and who knew what futures that might create. That evening he told Kara about the encounter, and she listened with the same intense focus she had always given his stories. "Do you think he will stay?" she asked. "I think he will try," Vance replied. "Just like you tried, just like I tried, and maybe, like us, he will find that trying is enough." "We have built something good here," Kara said softly. "Something that will outlast us." "We have," Vance agreed. "But we are not done yet. We still have years of work ahead, years of life to live." "Good," Kara said, and kissed him with all the passion and tenderness that 20 years had only deepened. "I am not ready to be done with you yet, Vance Ryerson." "And I am not done with you, Chieftain Kara," Vance replied. And they held each other as the evening settled over the valley, as the lights of the clan's homes began to glow like earthbound stars, as their shared life continued its steady, precious unfolding. Years later, when they were old and gray, when Alara had children of her own and the smithy had passed to a new generation of apprentices, Vance and Kara would sit together on the porch of their cabin and watch the valley they had helped build. And sometimes Vance would take Kara's hand, and she would look at him with those same amber eyes that had watched his hands so intently decades before. And he would remember the day a desperate orc woman had whispered, "Go ahead," and trusted him with her armor, her safety, and eventually her heart. And he would think, as he always did, that it had been the best decision of his life. Their story became legend in the valley, told and retold to each new generation. The tale of the human blacksmith and the orc warrior who had chosen love over fear, who had built a life together despite every obstacle, who had proven that the divisions between peoples were not insurmountable when courage and compassion led the way. But for Vance and Kara, it was never a legend or a story meant to teach lessons. It was simply their life, messy and beautiful, difficult and rewarding, ordinary and extraordinary in equal measure. It was shared meals and shared work, quiet conversations and passionate debates, the comfort of familiar touch and the excitement of new discoveries. It was raising a daughter, leading a clan, forging metal and forging futures, one day at a time. And on quiet evenings, when the world was soft with twilight and the stars began their ancient dance overhead, Vance would sometimes catch Kara watching his hands as he worked on some small project, her eyes holding that same intensity from their first meeting. And he would smile and she would smile back, and no words would be needed to express what they both knew: they had found their home. They had found each other, and that, in the end, was everything that mattered. The valley prospered under Kara's long leadership, and when she eventually passed the chieftainship to Alara, it was with the confidence that their work would continue. The clan had grown from a small group of outcasts to a thriving community that stood as living proof that another way was possible, that old hatreds could be set aside, that new futures could be built by those brave enough to try. Vance and Kara lived to see great-grandchildren playing in the valley, to see the smithy become a true school of craftsmanship where humans and orcs learned side by side, to see trade routes established and alliances forged that would have been unthinkable in their youth. They lived long lives, full lives, lives rich with purpose and love and the deep satisfaction of work well done. And when the end finally came for Vance, decades after that fateful day in his smithy, he died with Kara's hand in his, her face the last thing he saw, her voice the last thing he heard. She followed him not long after, and they were buried side by side on the ridge overlooking the valley, where they had so often stood together, watching the sunset paint the world in colors of hope. Their graves became a place of pilgrimage for those seeking inspiration or courage, a reminder that love could bridge any divide, and that ordinary people, through extraordinary compassion, could change the world. Flowers were always fresh on those graves, tended by grateful descendants and clan members who understood that they lived in a better world because two people had once chosen kindness over fear. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind whispered through the valley, those tending the graves would swear they could hear laughter, or see two figures standing hand in hand on the ridge, watching over the community they had helped create. Whether it was truth or fancy, whether spirits truly returned to watch over those they loved, no one could say for certain. But in the smithy that had been Vance's and was now run by his great-granddaughter, a piece of armor hung on the wall Kara's breastplate, preserved with careful love, the leather straps Vance had replaced still strong after all those years. And beside it hung a small plaque with words that had become the clan's unofficial motto. She whispered, "Go ahead and change two lives forever. May we all have such courage." It was a simple memorial to a simple act of trust, to the moment when an orc woman had placed her safety in the hands of a human blacksmith, and he had chosen to be worthy of that trust. But from that simple moment had grown a clan, a community, a legacy of hope that would endure long after the individuals who started it had returned to the earth. And that, Alara would tell her own children when they asked about their remarkable grandparents, was the true magic of the story. Not that it involved orcs and humans or warriors and blacksmiths, but that it proved love and courage could transform the world, one repaired piece of armor at a time, one whispered permission at a time, one choice to hope rather than fear at a time. The story of Vance and Kara lived on, not just in words but in the reality they had helped create a valley where children played without thought for the color of their skin or the shape of their ears, where craft was valued over bloodline, where the future was built by hands working together rather than fists raised in anger. And in the hearts of all who knew the tale, the image remained vivid and powerful. A woman's eyes watching hands that moved with care and skill, a whispered permission that carried the weight of trust, the beginning of something beautiful born from something as simple as one person helping another in a moment of need. That was how their story ended, and how it began anew, with each telling a reminder that every grand journey starts with a single step. Every lasting love begins with a moment of trust, and every better world is built by those who dare to repair what is broken rather than discard it. In the end, Vance and Kara's legacy was not measured in battles won or territories claimed, but in the countless small acts of kindness their example inspired, in the children who grew up knowing that love transcended boundaries, in the community that proved cooperation was stronger than conflict. They had lived well, loved deeply, and left the world better than they found it. What more could any life aspire to achieve? And so their story concluded where it began, with trust, with care, with the simple, profound act of one person helping another, and the extraordinary places that simple act can lead when courage and compassion light the way.